The glittering lights of Hollywood have always promised a world of absolute perfection, a flawless facade where fairy tales are meant to come alive, and love is supposed to conquer all obstacles under the constant glare of cameras. For decades, the public has watched the highest-profile romances unfold on the red carpets of the world, capturing every smile, every embrace, and every grand gesture of devotion. We look at these icons of modern pop culture and often believe that their lives are entirely seamless, untouched by the deeply painful, chaotic realities of ordinary human existence. Yet, behind the multi-million-dollar mansions, the platinum records, and the meticulously orchestrated public appearances, a much darker and more turbulent reality often plays out away from the prying eyes of the paparazzi. The true cost of fame is rarely measured in financial terms, but rather in the profound personal sacrifices, the emotional fragmentation, and the repetitive patterns of heartbreak that occur when one lives their entire adult life in a goldfish bowl. It is a world where finding genuine connection is nearly impossible, and maintaining it under the weight of global expectation is an entirely different battle altogether. When we see a global superstar radiating confidence on a massive stage, it is easy to forget that beneath the glamorous wardrobe beats a heart that is just as vulnerable to rejection, loneliness, and confusion as anyone else's. The journey to self-discovery for these individuals is not a private path walked in quiet contemplation, but a highly public and often agonizing process of trial and error that plays out across global headlines. To understand the magnitude of what it means to truly lose oneself in the pursuit of love, one must look closely at the moments when the music stops, the crowds fade away, and the harsh reality of an empty house sets in. It is in these precise moments of profound silence that the grandest illusions of stardom begin to crumble, leaving behind a person who must finally confront the reflection in the mirror without the comforting buffer of public adoration. Before we dive into the deep, transformative revelations of this global icon and uncover the intense emotional reckoning that changed her entire life, please take a brief moment to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an update on the stories that shape our world. For over 40 years, the narrative of modern romance in the entertainment industry has been heavily defined by one singular, unstoppable force whose name is synonymous with ultimate glamour, relentless ambition, and an unwavering belief in the power of true love. Jennifer Lopez has spent her entire legendary career captivating audiences not just with her undeniable artistic talents, but with her highly publicized, deeply dramatic search for a definitive soulmate. Her life has been an astonishing series of breathtaking romantic peaks and devastatingly public valleys, with each chapter documented extensively by the media and thoroughly analyzed by millions of devoted fans worldwide. From whirlwind engagements to lavish, star-studded weddings, her heart has been on display for the entire world to witness, making her personal life a complex tapestry of passion, hope, and recurring heartbreak. Every time she walked down the aisle or proudly displayed a new engagement ring, the world collectively cheered, hoping that this would finally be the definitive fairy tale ending she so desperately sought. Yet, time and time again, the bright promises of forever faded into the reality of legal separations, bitter public scrutiny, and a growing sense of personal disillusionment that seemed to follow her despite her monumental career achievements. The cycle of finding love, celebrating it under the global spotlight, and then watching it spectacularly fracture became a recurring theme in her narrative, leading many to wonder if true domestic happiness was simply incompatible with her level of historic stardom. The year 2024 was supposed to be a triumphant celebration of a love story 20 years in the making. A poetic validation that true love always finds its way back, no matter how much time passes or how many obstacles are placed in the path. The highly publicized reunion and subsequent marriage between Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck had captured the imagination of the public like few other celebrity romances in history, serving as a real-life testament to the enduring power of a second chance. It was a narrative that felt almost destined, a beautiful full-circle moment that promised to heal the deep wounds of their abrupt and painful separation in the early 2000s under intense media pressure. However, behind the grand public narrative of a historic comeback romance, the internal foundations were already experiencing immense and unsustainable strain. By the time the summer of 2024 arrived, the grand illusion began to unravel completely, culminating in a definitive and heartbreaking decision that would alter the course of her life forever. Jennifer Lopez made the deeply painful choice to file for divorce, bringing an abrupt and final end to the second chapter of her relationship with Affleck and plunging her into an unprecedented emotional space. The public announcement sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry, leaving fans and commentators scrambling to understand how a love that seemed so monumental could collapse so quickly for a second time for Lopez. This was not just another failed marriage or a standard Hollywood breakup to be brushed aside with a generic public relations statement. It was a profound, catastrophic moment of total systemic failure in her personal life. The collapse of her marriage to Affleck felt as though her entire life had blown up directly in her own face, creating a level of internal chaos that she had never experienced before, forcing her to confront the absolute limits of her emotional endurance. In the immediate aftermath of the separation, as the media storm raged outside her doors, she made the drastic and unexpected decision to cancel her highly anticipated global concert tour. This cancellation was a massive professional sacrifice, a clear signal to the world that the internal damage was far too severe to be masked by the high-energy performances and glittering costumes of a stage show. She chose to step away from the applause, to retreat from the adulation of her fans, and to simply sit in the heavy, uncomfortable silence of her own reality. It was a terrifying moment of forced stillness for a woman who had spent the last 4 decades constantly running from one project to another, using her relentless work ethic as a shield against the deeper, unresolved issues of her inner world. In that profound silence, stripped of the distractions of her massive career and the comforting presence of a partner, she was forced to ask herself the hardest questions an individual can face about their own patterns, choices, and responsibility for their own repeated heartbreak. The realization did not arrive like a sudden flash of lightning, but rather as a heavy, persistent weight that gradually forced Jennifer Lopez to acknowledge a pattern she had been running from for the better part of her adult life. Sitting in the quiet sanctuary of her home, having stepped away from the frenetic energy of international touring and the relentless demands of her public persona, she found herself trapped in an introspective cage of her own making. The narrative that had defined her existence, a series of high-profile, glamorous, and ultimately doomed relationships, now required a total deconstruction. For years, she had looked outward for the source of her dissatisfaction, frequently placing the burden of her emotional unhappiness on the changing tides of her celebrity partners or the unforgiving nature of the public eye. It was an easy, well-trodden path to blame the external, to point the finger at a demanding career, the intrusive nature of the paparazzi, or the inevitable compatibility issues that arise when two global stars attempt to merge their complicated lives under one roof. But as the dust settled on the wreckage of her marriage to Ben Affleck in 2024, the old justifications began to ring hollow and deeply unsatisfactory. She realized that she had been trapped in a continuous loop of attracting the same type of experience time after time, without ever stopping to consider that the common denominator in every single one of those failed chapters was herself. The process of finally deciding to look inside was not a graceful or pleasant evolution, but a raw, agonizing, and necessary confrontation with the fragmented pieces of her own identity. On the podcast Smartless, her conversation with Jason Bateman, Sean Hayes, and Will Arnett revealed the depth of this painful internal excavation. She spoke with a level of brutal honesty that was both refreshing and jarring, admitting that for a long time she had simply lacked the self-awareness to recognize the specific emotional deficits that kept pulling her toward the same dysfunctional outcomes. She described the sensation as being completely bewildered by her own life, as if she were a spectator watching a repetitive drama unfold where she knew the lines but couldn't stop the tragic ending. The admission that she had to stop ficting around and finally figure herself out was the pivotal turning point of her recent journey. It was a moment of radical responsibility, where she had to acknowledge that blaming the past 20 years of tumult on external factors was merely a defense mechanism meant to protect a fragile core that she had never truly nurtured. She had spent decades perfecting the art of being Jennifer Lopez, the global superstar, the triple threat entertainer, and the fashion icon. But she had neglected the fundamental work of becoming a person who could exist comfortably within her own skin without the validation of a romantic partner. This healing journey, as she defined it, was not about searching for a new partner or finding a more stable relationship. It was about the deliberate and often uncomfortable practice of deconstructing the romantic myths she had built her life upon. She had spent so long looking for love in external things, in the thrill of a new engagement, in the ceremony of a wedding, in the public approval of a power couple status, that she had completely lost sight of her own independent humanity. She acknowledged that this is a process that every human being needs to undertake at some point, yet few have the courage to do it while living under the relentless microscope of global media. For Lopez, the challenge was twofold. She had to break the habit of using romantic obsession as a distraction from deeper existential anxiety and simultaneously learn how to exist in the silence of her own home without the need for an audience or a partner. This meant reassessing every major choice she had made over the previous 2 decades, examining not just the men she had been with, but the specific unconscious needs that she was trying to fill through those connections. It was a process of unraveling the psychological knots that had led her to ignore red flags, to rush into life-altering commitments, and to mistake intense passion for long-term stability. The tension within this realization is profound because it challenges the very bedrock of her public identity. Throughout her career, she has been marketed as the ultimate romantic, the woman who believes in love against all odds, the queen of the rom-com who delivers happy endings on screen and tries to emulate them off-screen. To pivot away from that narrative, to suggest that she was actually chasing a dangerous illusion that caused her nothing but pain, is a bold and potentially isolating stance. Yet she spoke with a sense of relief that suggested she was finally tired of the performance. The acknowledgement that her choices were the architects of her own suffering is a heavy burden to bear, but it is also the only way to reclaim agency. She discussed how the tumultuous nature of her romantic life had created a rhythm of extreme highs and crushing lows, a cycle that had left her emotionally exhausted and disconnected from her own truth. By canceling her tour and sitting with the uncomfortable reality of her life in 2024, she wasn't just taking a break. She was performing an emergency rescue operation on her own psyche. This was the moment where the global icon vanished, and the real woman, struggling with her own humanity and the consequences of her past, emerged. This shift in perspective is significant because it highlights a universal struggle that is often obscured by the glitter of celebrity, the difficulty of being truly known when the world is constantly projecting a fantasy upon you. For decades, Jennifer Lopez existed as a concept, a symbol of success and desire that people could admire from afar, but the woman beneath that symbol was often ignored, even by herself. In the aftermath of her most recent divorce, the pressure to maintain that public facade was finally outweighed by the internal pressure to survive. She began to speak less about the romantic partners and more about the internal work required to stop the cycle of disappointment. This included recognizing that her own need for external validation was a powerful attractor for specific types of partners who could perhaps match her intensity but not provide the emotional security she actually needed. The clarity she achieved was not about declaring all her past relationships mistakes, but rather about owning the fact that she was the one who kept entering into them without the necessary internal grounding. This level of maturity, acknowledging her own participation in her unhappiness, is a vital departure from her past interviews where she often framed herself as the resilient survivor overcoming obstacles imposed by others. Now, as she moves forward, the tension remains palpable. The public is accustomed to seeing her in a state of romantic evolution, constantly evolving her look, her sound, and her partners. To see her in a state of quiet, potentially permanent introspection is a new and challenging dynamic for her audience. The question that hangs in the air is whether she can truly maintain this newfound sense of independence, and whether the public, which has built an entire industry around the drama of her love life, will allow her the space to simply be herself without the constant demand for a new romantic narrative. She is currently navigating a period where she is no longer defined by who she is with, but by what she is learning about who she is when she is alone. This transition is marked by a deep sense of humility, as she admits that she had things about herself that she didn't recognize or understand, hidden vulnerabilities and patterns that were keeping her trapped. It is a confession of human fallibility that stands in stark contrast to the perfectly polished image of the superstar we have come to know. She is finally giving herself credit for having the bravery to stop the show, to step out of the spotlight, and to start the long, slow, and often lonely work of figuring out what, underneath all the layers of fame and expectation, actually matters to her. To truly understand the profound depth of the transformation Jennifer Lopez has undergone, one must meticulously trace the lengthy, complex historical path that brought her to this definitive psychological crossroads. Her romantic journey has never been a series of simple, isolated incidents. Instead, it represents a deep 40-year narrative arc filled with immense passion, immense sacrifice, and a relentless search for identity under the blinding spotlight of global fame. The long history of her marriages offers a vivid roadmap of a woman trying to balance the extraordinary demands of being a cultural icon with the basic human need to be loved for who she is behind the curtain. Long before the highly publicized reunion and eventual collapse of her relationship with Ben Affleck in 2024, Lopez was a young, fiercely ambitious artist trying to find her footing in a world that was eager to consume her image. Her very first marriage to Ojani in 1997 took place at a pivotal moment in her life, just as she was breaking through into mainstream Hollywood with her legendary career-defining performance in Selena. Noah, a humble waiter working at a restaurant in Miami, represented a connection to a simpler, more grounded existence before the tidal wave of international stardom completely swept her away. However, the sheer speed of her rising fame, combined with the brutal competing pressures of a rapidly expanding Hollywood career, created a strain that their young marriage simply could not survive, ending in a quiet divorce after less than a year. The painful aftermath of that first union would linger for many years, spiraling into complex legal disputes as Noah repeatedly attempted to publish intimate details of their personal correspondence, forcing Lopez to engage in multiple, stressful court actions to protect her privacy. As her pop career skyrocketed into the stratosphere during the early 2000s, Lopez's second marriage to choreographer Cris Judd in 2001 highlighted the unique, intense challenges of navigating romance within the tight-knit circle of her professional entourage. Having met Judd while working on the music video for her massive hit Love Don't Cost a Thing, their relationship quickly escalated from a structured, professional collaboration into a whirlwind romance built on the road and in intense dance rehearsals. They married in a beautiful private ceremony in California, but the overwhelming, suffocating pressure of her global celebrity status and the relentless, aggressive pursuit of the international paparazzi immediately took a heavy emotional toll on the newlyweds. Judd would later describe the extreme invasive scrutiny of their daily lives as completely overwhelming, an impossible environment for a young marriage to take root, leading to their quiet separation in 2002 after less than a single year of marriage. This rapid succession of short-lived relationships set a dangerous pattern of high-intensity, public romances that seemed to burn brightly before quickly consuming themselves under the glare of media attention. It was a cycle that reached its first massive crescendo with her initial legendary engagement to Ben Affleck in the early 2000s, a cultural phenomenon that birthed the term Benefer and created a media circus of unprecedented proportions. Their sudden, dramatic decision to call off their wedding in 2003 under intense scrutiny left a lingering, unhealed wound in Lopez's personal history. A piece of unfinished business that would eventually draw them back together nearly 20 years later for their ill-fated second chapter, following the devastating collapse of that first era with Affleck. Lopez sought refuge and stability in her third marriage to international Latin music superstar Marc Anthony in 2004, a relationship that began at the absolute height of both of their respective monumental musical careers. This marriage quickly became a major global power pairing, celebrated by millions of fans as a beautiful union of two cultural forces who deeply understood the unique pressures of the music industry. Together, they welcomed their cherished twins, Max and Em, in 2008, creating what appeared from the outside to be a stable, highly successful family unit built to withstand the tests of time. Yet, behind the glamorous scenes of their shared concert tours and red carpet appearances, the marriage was already under immense, unsustainable strain, eventually leading to their emotional separation in 2011 after 7 years together. Despite the deep pain of the breakup, Lopez and Anthony remained fiercely committed to co-parenting their children, establishing a publicly cordial, supportive relationship that has endured for over a decade. This commitment to family took on a deeply meaningful public dimension as their children grew into their own unique identities, with Lopez consistently offering unwavering support for their personal journeys. In June of 2022, a video of Lopez went viral after she proudly introduced Em onstage using gender-neutral pronouns, signaling a deep public validation of her child's non-binary identity. More recently, public announcements revealed that the teenager, formerly known as Em, now goes by the name Oscar Muniz and uses masculine pronouns, a transition that highlights the supportive, loving environment Lopez has fought hard to maintain for her family despite her own personal upheavals. The sheer complexity of Lopez's personal history is further magnified when looking at the parallel lives of those she once loved, such as Marc Anthony, who moved on to find a different kind of personal stability. Following their divorce, Anthony married Venezuelan model Shannon de Lima in 2014, a union that lasted until 2017, before eventually finding lasting happiness with Paraguayan model Nadia Ferreira, whom he married in early 2023, and with whom he welcomed his 7th child later that same year. For Lopez, however, the path was never quite as linear, marked instead by a high-profile engagement to baseball legend Alex Rodriguez that ultimately dissolved before they could reach the altar, leading her directly back into the arms of Ben Affleck for their historic, highly romanticized 2022 wedding in Las Vegas and subsequent celebration in Georgia. When that ultimate fairy tale finally shattered for good with her divorce filing in 2024, it became painfully clear that no amount of history, no amount of public desire, and no amount of sheer willpower could fix a relationship if the individuals involved had not healed their own internal wounds. The core meaning of Lopez's recent revelations on the Smartless podcast lies in her profound, unprecedented willingness to completely step away from this exhausting historical carousel of marriage and heartbreak. By canceling her tour, stepping into total isolation, and choosing to sit alone with her own thoughts, she finally broke the 40-year cycle of looking for salvation in the love of another person. This final realization is what makes her current chapter so profoundly important, not just for her own future survival, but as a powerful, universal lesson for anyone who has ever lost themselves in the relentless pursuit of an external ideal. Jennifer Lopez is no longer the resilient romantic survivor waiting for a prince to complete her story. She has finally become the sole author of her own happiness, fully recognizing that the only person who can truly save her is herself. The journey from the young woman marrying Ojani in 1997 to the enlightened, mature individual sitting in quiet contemplation in 2026 represents a complete monumental evolution of the soul. She has acknowledged her past choices, accepted her deep flaws, and given herself the profound credit she deserves for having the immense courage to look inside for the answers she had spent a lifetime seeking in others. The music may have paused, and the grand concert stages may have temporarily gone dark, but the voice that emerges from this profound silence is stronger, clearer, and more authentically human than it has ever been before.